Hey guys, it's Marshall Mathers the fourth here. In today's video, I will be talking today about the fact that I really wish that Eminem would have released the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album rather than the version of that album of his that he actually did give us in reality, unfortunately, because the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album would have had more songs on that album of his instead of the version of the album of his that he gave us instead in real life. And, I mean, there are some things about the version of his Slim Shady LP album that he did give us that I do love and I appreciate and am grateful of. But overall, I definitely wish, at least in my personal opinion, that he would have instead released and given us the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album, the version of that album of his that I honestly would have much rather preferred than the version of the Slim Shady LP album of his that he gave us instead. Like, when it comes to the version of his Slim Shady LP album that he did give us, what I do love about it is that he has songs like Rock Bottom, which is one of my all-time favorite Eminem songs, and on the Unmastered Sequence version of that album of his, he would not have had that song. There's also other songs like Still Don't Give a Fuck that he has on the version of his Slim Shady LP album that he gave us, which he would not have had on the Unmastered Sequence version of that album of his, which would just be heartbreaking and very unfortunate. And he also would not have had the song Role Model on the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album. But what is very interesting about the Unmastered Sequence version of that album of his is the fact that it would have included Low Down Dirty, No One's Iller Than Me featuring D12, and Murder Murder, and also Take the World With Me featuring Pace One and Bizarre. And those are four songs that sadly did not make it on to the Slim Shady LP album that Eminem did give us in reality and gave us instead of releasing the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album, which overall I think would have been much better and greater than the version of his album that he would have given us. And what's also very interesting about the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album is the fact that it would have had and included the uncensored band version of his song Hi, My Name Is. And what's interesting about that song is the fact that there's like three different versions of it. There's, of course, and obviously the clean version. There's the so-called explicit or dirty version, which is actually not the true, real explicit dirty version, because in the actual uncensored band version of his song Hi, My Name Is, he says in a verse, my English teacher wanted to have sex with me in junior high. The only problem was my English teacher was a guy. I smacked him in his face with an eraser, chased him around a desk with a stapler, stapled his nuts to a stack of paper. But in the explicit dirty version, he changed that verse instead to my English teacher wanted to flunk me in junior high. Thanks a lot. Next semester I'll be 35. And then he continues with, I chased him around a desk with a stapler and stapled his nuts to a stack of paper. But there's also another line in the actual uncensored band version of that song of his where he raps, walked up in a strip club, had my jacket zipped up, stuck my dick in a tip cup, and he talks about like raping lesbians and running over pedestrians. But in the so-called explicit dirty version of that song of his that he released on the version of his Slim Shady LP album he gave us instead, in the reality of things, he censors the line where he's rapping, raping lesbians, and running over pedestrians. So there's differences on the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album. And, you know, what's also interesting about that version of his album that, of course, never ended up getting actually released and seeing the light of day, and that version of his Slim Shady LP album not have been the one that he actually released, unfortunately, is the fact that it would not have had as many skits as the Slim Shady LP album that Eminem did release instead. Actually, because on the version of Eminem's Slim Shady LP album that he gave the world or the public or whatever you want to call it instead, in the reality of this world, and actually, he has a total of 6 damn skits, which, in my personal opinion, I think is way too fucking many. I think it is ridiculous, unnecessary, and pointless that he thought to and decided to and chose to put and add 6 skits on his Slim Shady LP album, starting off with Public Service Announcement, which is track 1, or the opening skit for the album of his. Then he has Paul Calls Em skit, which is the second skit, and I think that's like track 4 or 6 or something like that. And then track 8 is the Bitch skit, and that's the third skit. I'm sorry, it's the third skit. And that's for track 8. And then for track 10, he has the Lounge skit, which is the skit that comes on right before the song My Fault, the song where he goes, I never meant to give you mushrooms, girl. I never meant to bring you to my world, but now you're sitting in the corner crying, and it's my fault, my fault. The track that comes on right before that song is called Lounge Skit, because it's a skit that's pretty much like just Eminem doing like almost like a play or whatever version of that song. And also there's the Ken Kniff skit, and I can't remember like which number track that is on his Slim Shady LP album, but that would have been his 5th skit. And then his 6th skit, which is track 16, is entitled Soap Skit, and it's a skit that comes on right before Eminem's song Bad Meets Evil featuring Royce da 5'9" off of his Slim Shady LP album. And that right there is 6 skits. And you know, the way I look at it is that, like, I'm not saying that I would not have wanted Eminem to have put or added skits on his Slim Shady LP album. I'm completely and totally fine with that. But there are like certain skits that I feel and believe have a meaning and have a purpose to be on his Slim Shady LP album. For example, the Public Service Announcement opening skit for track 1 has a meaning and purpose to be on that album, because the guy who's doing it is pretty much introducing the rap game in the world to Eminem or Slim Shady or whatever. And also the second skit on his album, Slim Shady LP album, Paul Calls Em skit, has meaning and purpose, because it's the skit where Paul calls Eminem, pretty much telling him to like tone it down, stop making so many crazy songs. Like, Paul Rosenberg, Eminem's rap manager, is supposed to be the voice of reason in those skits, which I find interesting and fascinating. And again, I think when it comes to that skit also, it has meaning and purpose to be on the album of his. Another skit that I feel has meaning and purpose, and last but not least, in the third one, being the Ken Kniff skit. Because Ken Kniff was one of the characters that Eminem made up just out of nowhere when he was a young and youthful rapper in his early on rap career, which was a really funny as fuck, hilarious character, which is also supposed to be a gay character. And it's just hilarious. It's so damn funny. And when it comes to that skit also, I feel and believe that it has meaning and purpose to be on that album of his. But when it comes to skits like the bitch skit, even though I definitely would say that that skit has a meaning and purpose on that album of his, I would have much rather preferred track 8 instead to have been the song Low Down Dirty instead of the bitch skit, because, I mean, he only has a total of 14 songs on his Slim Shady LP album. I mean, if you honestly even go back to Eminem's like first 3 albums, his Slim Shady LP album, Marshall Mathers LP album, and Eminem Show album, and actually count the actual songs that he has on those albums of his, you will realize that he actually does not have that many songs. Like, by first look, you'll think, oh wow, they're long albums. It's his Slim Shady LP album is 20 tracks long. His Marshall Mathers LP album is 18 tracks long. His Eminem Show album is 20 tracks long. But they're not actually that many songs. I mean, if there was, that would be awesome. That'd be a dream come true. But a lot of the tracks on those early albums of Eminem's in his early on rap career are actually skits. And unless you actually count the amount of skits that are on those first 3 albums of his in his early on rap career, you will understand and realize and see that, wow, this guy, this rapper, regardless if you're a fan of his or not, or especially a stan, you'll see that he actually did not have that many songs on those early on albums of his in his early on rap career. And that's what pisses me the fuck off. That's what breaks my damn heart and just crushes me. And it just makes me so angry as to why Eminem thought the need to put way too many skits on his albums. Like, I would say 3 or 4 skits tops at the very most and max for any of his early on albums. Like 4 skits maybe at the very most and at the max. But when it comes to his Slim Shady LP album, I would have preferred just 3. The public service announcement skit, the Paul Calls Em skit, and the Ken Kniff skit, and that's it. No more. No more than that. That would have been the limit of what I would have personally chosen myself, and wish more than anything that Eminem would have chose also himself. And anyways, track 10, instead of being the lounge skit, I would have much rather preferred it to have been No One's Iller Than Me featuring D12 from Eminem's Slim Shady EP. And, you know, I just hate the fact that he thought it was a good idea to release 6 skits on his Slim Shady LP album, which is also really weird because, you know, his Marshall Mathers LP album and his Eminem Show album only had 4 skits, not 6. But his Slim Shady LP album had 6 whole damn skits. That is just insane. That's ridiculous. That's way too many. And I don't care who you are or what your opinion is or what you believe, because it doesn't change it from the fact that Eminem made a serious grave mistake of putting and releasing too many skits, especially on his Slim Shady LP album. And, you know, in my personal opinion, like I said, and I'll say again, I would have preferred at the very most in the max, at the highest limit, to have only had 3 skits on that album of his. That's what I strongly believe. And I am so pissed at Eminem that he chose to put 6 unnecessary, pointless skits on his Slim Shady LP album. 3, fine. I don't care about 3. if they would have been the public service announcement skit, Paul Calls Them skit, and Ken Kniff skit. If that would have been all, fine. I would have been able to deal with that. I would have accepted that. I would have been at peace with that. I would have been just perfect with that. And anyways, so track 10, instead of being the lounge skit, I would have much rather preferred it to have been No One's Iller Than Me featuring D12 from Eminem's Slim Shady EP. And I wish it would have been instead of the lounge skit. And then last but not least, for track 16, instead of being the unnecessary, pointless soap skit, I would have so much rather preferred it to have been Murder Murder from Eminem's Slim Shady EP, instead of it being the soap skit, which is just so unnecessary and pointless and just so flat out ridiculous and had absolutely zero meaning and purpose to be on that album of his when he first released it. And if he would have just taken off 3 skits of his Slim Shady LP album, just 3, no more than that, so he would have still had 3 skits: public service announcement skit, Paul Calls Them skit, and Ken Kniff skit, but just have taken off and never have thought of or released the bitch skit, the lounge skit, or the soap skit, because those 3 skits could have instead have been, which would have been so much better, Low Down Dirty for track 8 instead of the bitch skit. Track 10, instead of being the lounge skit, could have instead have been No One's Iller Than Me featuring D12, and track 16, instead of being the soap skit, could have instead have been Murder Murder. 3 songs that were left out from Eminem's Slim Shady LP album that were from his Slim Shady EP, and those 3 songs I really wish would have made it onto Eminem's Slim Shady LP album, and I'm fucking pissed that they didn't. And I mean that too. I mean that with all my heart. I am so pissed that those 3 songs did not make it onto Eminem's Slim Shady LP album, and that he had 6 skits instead of only just having 3, which I feel would have been plenty. I think that would have been more than enough. Because here's the thing. Most rappers, unlike Eminem, whether they're from the old school era or new school era, don't ever put or release skits on their albums. I mean, that's just an all-around known fact. Most rappers will release or put on their rap albums interludes. But when it comes to Eminem, which is what really sets him apart from most other rappers and kind of separates him from them and distances himself from them, is he puts skits on his albums, which I think is interesting and fascinating and unique of him, because it's definitely different and original. But at the same time, if he would have only had like a certain amount or a limit to how many skits he would have put on his albums of his, I would have been fine with that. I would have accepted that. I would have been at peace with that. But instead, he had to just put so many damn skits on his earlier albums, especially his Slim Shady LP album. With his other albums after his Slim Shady LP album, I'm fine with there being 4 skits on his other albums after his Slim Shady LP album. But when it came to his Slim Shady LP album, his mainstream major label debut hip hop rap album, that album, in my opinion and point of view, just had way too many skits. 6 is just an insane amount. It's too many. And that's just so unnecessary and pointless. And that's the way I personally feel. Obviously, you can have your own opinions and you can believe what you want to believe, but I'm entitled to my opinion and nobody's going to change my mind or convince me otherwise. But there's another thing I really wish would have been different about Eminem's Slim Shady LP album, in the way that I wish that he would have given us the uncensored banned version of his song, Hi, My Name Is, because let's face it, that's the real, actual, true version of that song of his. And that's the version of his song, of his Hi, My Name Is song, that I really wish more than anything that we would have gotten and that he would have actually released on his Slim Shady LP album that he actually did give the public or the world or whatever. And last but not least, I also wish that he would not have had his song My Fault on his Slim Shady LP album, because, you know, when I think about that song, even though I don't hate it or even dislike it, it's definitely the weaker song off of that album of his. It's not that good. I mean, it's okay. I don't necessarily think it's like bad or anything, but for the most part, it sucks. And it's definitely, without a doubt, the most weakest and worst song on that first album of his. And that's why I would have wished instead that he would have put the song Take the World With Me featuring Pace One and Bizarre. And if you have never heard that song, I really highly suggest you go look it up on YouTube, because it is a really dope, epic, amazing, awesome, incredible, outstanding, fantastic, out of this world song that Eminem made and sadly did not release on his Slim Shady LP album, which, in my personal opinion, I feel and believe he should have. Instead of ever making and releasing the song My Fault, which again was, I never meant to give you mushrooms, girl. I never meant to bring you to my world. But now you're sitting in the corner crying and it's my fault, my fault. I mean, that's the chorus or hook of that song. And, you know, the beat's not necessarily that great for that song either. It's an okay beat. But again, it's not the greatest song that Eminem could have put on that album of his. And I feel it would have been much better and greater if he would have put for track 11 the song Take the World With Me featuring Pace One and Bizarre, which would have been a way better and greater replacement or song to have put on and released on his Slim Shady LP album instead of that song. And, you know, I also wish and definitely wish that Eminem would have made and released a deluxe edition of his Slim Shady LP album, including 3 more tracks, being in this order: Get You Mad, a finished completed version of his song Ghost Stories, and last but not least, Till Hell Freezes Over, which would have been a just perfect, awesome, amazing, incredible, outstanding, fantastic, out of this world song to have ended and closed out a deluxe edition version of his Slim Shady LP album. And it pisses me the fuck off that Eminem didn't think to release a deluxe edition of that album of his. And if he would have, and if he would have instead have actually had 17 songs on his Slim Shady LP album, rather than only actually 14 and 6 skits, and only would have had 3 skits, and instead of only having 6 skits, only had 3 and actually had 17 songs. And if he would have made and released a deluxe edition, which would have been very considerate, generous, and thoughtful of him to have actually made and released for all of his fans, and especially stans most of all, since we're his crazed, obsessed fans, and we're obsessed and fixated with the man and the rapper and whatnot. So it would have been the greatest gift to us. He would have had a grand total of 20 songs on his Slim Shady LP album. And I really believe that he should have had that with a deluxe edition, that is, with the standard edition combined with the deluxe edition, have a grand total of 20 songs in a grand total. And the reason why I say and believe that is because it took him until age 26 to release his Slim Shady LP album. And knowing that it took him so long to become a famous rapper, unlike most old school rappers who were able to become famous rappers when they were in their late teens and early 20s and started releasing their albums when they were in their late teens and early 20s, which is just so unfair. I feel like since it took Eminem until 25 years old to be signed by Dr. Dre to Dr. Dre's Aftermath record label company on March 9, 1998, when Eminem was 25 years old, and at the time Dr. Dre was 33, I feel like it would have only made logical sense for Eminem to have made his first album have a lot of songs, like many songs, because it took him until the age of 26 to release his major label debut mainstream hip-hop rap album, the Slim Shady LP. And I also wish that the deluxe edition of his Slim Shady LP album would have had a different cover, like what I would have imagined a deluxe edition cover of his Slim Shady LP album to have been, where the car that's on the cover be like reversed and show like the back or the rear of the car, and then have Eminem standing in front of it holding Haley in his arms, and then have a much larger, bigger picture of the moon, which would have been like symbolic of implying the fact that it would have been the much fuller, complete version of this album of his, the ultimate version of it, the fatter, thicker version. And that's what the bigger or larger photo of the moon would imply. And also, like, so we would have had a more close-up of Eminem and Haley, and also a close-up of the moon, which would have been dope. And also, and hopefully, a close-up of the car, and a close-up of Kim's legs and feet dangling out of the trunk, or hanging out of the trunk. I think that would have been just so sick and sweet to have had that. And, you know, here's one thing I also want to say, and pretty much the last thing is that I believe that Eminem, at the very latest, considering with when he did become a famous rapper, even though he didn't like release anything the moment he got signed, but he technically was famous since he was 25 years old, since he officially got signed to Dr. Dre's Aftermath record label company on March 9, 1998, when he was 25 years old, and at the time Dr. Dre himself was 33 years old. I feel like Eminem should have released his Slim Shady LP album on exactly and specifically November 13 in the year of 1998, so that that album of his could have still been released within the year of 1998, because in my personal opinion, and what I strongly believe, is the fact that his Slim Shady LP album should have came out in the year of 1998, and nobody can change my mind or convince me otherwise on that fact. I mean, just the look of it, the atmosphere and the tone and whatnot of that album of his just feels much more like an album of his that should have still came out in the year of 1998. And you know what? That would have been 8 months after being signed to Dr. Dre's Aftermath record label company. I mean, if he got signed in March of 98, then April, May, June, July, August, September, October of 98 would have been 7 months after being signed. November would have been 8. And knowing that it only takes 4 to 6 months to make and release a hip-hop rap album, at least according to what I know and understand and what I've researched online on the internet, I feel like at the very longest and most, Eminem should have waited to release that first album of his, should have only been 8 months after being signed. And that's just how I feel, and nobody can change my mind or convince me otherwise. But you know what? I do feel like he probably would have done that if he would have released the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album, but still in like the same order of the Slim Shady LP album that he did release, but just have added the uncensored band version of Hi My Name Is, And instead of having the bitch skit, the lounge skit, the song My Fault, and the soap skit, have Low Down Dirty for track 8 instead of the bitch skit. For track 10 instead of the lounge skit, No One's Iller Than Me featuring D12 instead of the song My Fault, have the song Take the World With Me featuring Pace One and Bizarre, and instead of the soap skit for track 16, have the song Murder Murder, and then have also indefinitely have included a deluxe edition of his Slim Shady LP album, including the songs Get You Mad, a finished completed version of Ghost Stories, also known as Demon Inside, and last but not least, Till Hell Freezes Over. So that he would have had, on the standard edition of his Slim Shady LP album, 17 songs in all, in total. And then for the deluxe edition, added to and included with the standard edition of the album of his, have a grand total of 20 songs, which would have been a dream come true and would have made me so happy, so excited, and just so at peace, especially if he would have released the album of his on November 13 in the year of 1998 at the very latest. And you know what? I believe that he probably would have done that if he would have released the Unmastered Sequence version of his Slim Shady LP album, but have taken away the song My Fault as well as the lounge skit, not have put or added the bitch skit or the soap skit either, and added like other songs such as Role Model, Going Through Change. I'm not going through changes. I'm sorry. Role Model, Rock Bottom. I'm sorry. I apologize. I made a mistake. Just please bear with me. So, Role Model, Rock Bottom, Still Don't Give a Fuck, If I Had, and there's some other songs that are on his Slim Shady LP album that would not have been released on the Unmastered Sequence version of the album of his. So anyways, that's all I wanted to say in today's video, and I've been wanting to make this video for a while now, and I'm glad that I finally have gotten to make it. So let me know what you all think in the comment section down below. I'm out.